Hello and welcome to EDHREC's Upping the Average, where we take a commander's average deck list as compiled by the data on EDHREC and make some quick improvements to take it from a good start to a great start. On this episode, we're looking at none other than the Catman himself, Lord Windgrace. Lord Windgrace comes to us from Commander 2018, and he's a 5-mana Jund Planeswalker who starts with 5 loyalty. He can add loyalty to discard cards and draw a card, drawing extra if we discarded a land, minus loyalty to return 2 lands from the graveyard to the battlefield, and his ultimate destroys up to 6 target non-land permanents and creates 2/2 Cat Forest Walk creature tokens in their place. The strategy is clear. Jund landfall all the way. From Omnath and Gitrog to Rampaging Baloths and Avenger of Zendikar, we get tons of benefits from putting lands into play and taking them in and out of our graveyard. As always, any changes that we make will either be cost neutral or will help lower the price of the overall deck list. Alright, let's load up Lord Windgrace's average deck list and put it into the Architect deck building website. I'm impressed with a lot of what we're seeing here, but there's always room for improvement. I've got 3 immediate observations: budget, protection, and of course, lands. Our first category is budget. This deck will be tricky to upgrade because landfall decks are a bit more difficult to build on a budget than some other strategies. Not impossible, of course, just more expensive to tune up. I'm not going to chop all the pricey cards, but I am going to be a little choosy with them. My goal is to prioritize the places that I think are wisest to put your money first when you are investing into this deck. Basically, I just don't want to assume that everyone is willing to drop $30 on an Azusa or an Oracle, especially when you don't need those cards to make this deck do its thing. So round 1 will be a lot of cuts for budget. First up, Wrenn and 6. This thing is over $60 because of its use in other formats. I know that its ability to return lands from the graveyard to the hand works with Windgrace, but so does a Tilling Tree Folk, and that costs like a dime. Just don't feel the need to spend $50 on a Wrenn and 6. Next, Demonic Tutor. I think I've cut this from all the Upping the Average videos so far. It's never a bad card, obviously, and you're probably already tired of hearing me say, play the pricey cards if you got them. But that's the thing. If you don't got this one, that's okay. You're in a landfall deck that can search for any land that it needs at almost any time, and whose commander is a huge draw engine. So this one is especially less necessary. Alright, this next one is painful. It hurts my soul to say that we're removing Crucible of Worlds because it is genuinely one of my all-time favorite cards. But it is also a $20 card. Luckily, cards like World Shaper, or Splendid Reclamation, or Ramanup Excavator, and even Lord Windgrace's ability will all help us get lands back, so we will survive even if we don't have the Crucible. Up next is a really expensive trio: Azusa, Oracle of Moldiah, and Exploration. Amazing, amazing, amazing cards for landfall decks, but they're also each like $30. Upgrade when you have the ability to, but we have workarounds here. We'll be okay without them. I also feel less bad about cutting Burgeoning, since I've often found it to be more effective in Wheels decks than in Landfall decks, but really it's still just an expensive card, and we can get by without it. If cutting these 4 cards saves us $100, yeah, that's a good way to go. Again, so many of these cards are beautiful if you get the chance to upgrade your Windgrace list. But if you just want to build a deck to start playing right away, these pricey cards can wait. There are other cards in the deck that cost more than $5 that are wiser places to put our money first, that help push us towards victory, from Omnath to Titania to Ob Nixilis. So invest in those first. But we're not done with the budget considerations just yet. The next card to turn a critical eye towards is Assassin's Trophy. Again, amazing card. But you know what this average list doesn't seem to have yet? The budget removal spells, like Chaos Warp or Beast Within. Depending on where you buy from, those are less than $1, and they're very good replacements. There's one more pricey card that I'll slice because it has a perfect budget swap. Lotus Cobra gives us mana whenever we get lands, but so does the less than $1 Stone Cedar Hierophant. If we put multiple lands into play, Hierophant will get multiple untap triggers, so she can untap our mana to help us play huge spells, or just to help us leave up our mana for instance on other people's turns. Speaking of which, that's actually an area of this deck I'd like to spruce up a bit more, and that's because of point number 2, protection. As a Planeswalker, Windgrace is really vulnerable to attack, and it would be unwise of us not to prepare for the fact that people are going to try and get rid of him to shut down our engine. He's really what makes the deck tick, so we have to keep him defended, and removal spells are one way to help accomplish this. I mentioned these spells earlier, so we're going to throw them in now. Removal spells are just a great source of defense. I'm gonna throw one more in here too, actually. Curtain's Call, which feels like a very underrated black removal spell if you ask me. If there are too many creatures in play though, we'll need some other methods of keeping Windgrace from harm. There aren't a lot of board wipes in this original average deck at all, which just feels wrong, so let's make some changes. The original list comes with a Gaze of Granite, but I really don't like this one. I'd rather play Pernicious Deed, because it can be activated without killing Windgrace. I also like Navineral's Disc for the same reason. It gets rid of anything pesky out there, while our walker gets to keep chugging along. And these can be used during the combat phase if someone tries to attack us. These both have the happy upside of deleting enemy mana rocks too, a thing that our deck basically doesn't have to worry about at all. So that's even better news. 2 wipes isn't enough though, I think we need one more. Chain Reaction isn't 100% as effective as Damnation or Toxic Deluge or even Blasphemous Act, but it is like 75 cents, and it gets the job done enough of the time that I'm happy to get that one back in here. Upgrade this to your tastes. The final card I'll add in this category is just darn good in a landfall deck. Constant Mists has a buyback cost that we barely even care about. Windgrace can get back any lands we lose, and so can so many of our other spells. I've seen this card single-handedly shut down aggro decks, which means we totally want it here. So we've covered the protection category from a few different angles so far, from pinpoint removal to wraths to fogs, but there is another angle to consider for our protection, and that's creatures. It might sound weird to focus on creatures in a landfall deck, but they're really important for Windgrace in particular. Windgrace wants lots of lands, but I think he also just wants some good old chump blockers. If you play a Cultivate on turn 3, and then Windgrace on turn 4, he's open to be attacked by anyone else's early turn plays. But if you play a Farhaven Elf on turn 3, and then Windgrace on turn 4, you've got a chump blocker to make sure he's not demolished right from the get-go. I'd like to add in this small suite of creatures that find lands, because they serve double duty by advancing our plan, and by keeping Windgrace's loyalty up. Even if they're ultimately destined to die, small chip damage on a Planeswalker adds up, and it costs us very little to mitigate for that. Springbloom Druid in particular is surprising not to see in the original average deck list. I'll highlight Yavimaya Elder here too, actually. It doesn't ramp lands into play, but it does put them into our hand, so he's both a blocker and gives Windgrace discard fodder. To make room for all this, I think I need to cut some cards though. I'm gonna cut what I perceive to be the weakest of the ramp options here to make room for those new additions. Far Wanderings is awkward early game, and at the point where it would get 3 lands, we frankly may have run out of basic lands to fetch out anyway. Explore is meh, and I've always found Colony Heart Expedition to be just a little too slow. Oh, and Explosive Vegetation has at least 3 different cards that are superior to it in nearly every way, especially for our particular deck. So I'm just gonna swap that one out for Skyshroud Claim. Alright, we've cut things for budget, amped up our defenses, and that leaves just one more category. Time to look at some lands. Landfall decks provide us with a unique opportunity to let our lands do extra work for us, and even to play the role of spells. When we're making swaps in this category, I want to take a careful look at how lands, or other cards that interact with them, can be used to find extra value and even help us win the game. Alright, Strip Mine is great, but it's expensive. We're making the budget swap for Ghost Quarter here. And actually, if you do have a Strip Mine, totally play it, but you should also consider playing Ghost Quarter alongside it anyway. Ghost Quarter is really solid for landfall decks in general, because it can sometimes be useful to destroy our own land to get that landfall trigger, say from a Titania or an Omnath or a Gitrog or something. It's rare, but it's a pretty cool interaction. Also, Temple of the False God. I'm not even gonna get into the debate about whether this should be counted as ramp or whether it's a bad card. That's not my problem with it here. My problem with it is just that it's a non-basic land. We have to toe a really tough line when it comes to non-basics in a landfall deck. On the one hand, you want lots of them because they provide you with so much extra consistency and value. But on the other hand, you don't want to run out of basic lands in the deck. Because we'll be searching so many of them, it's actually pretty easy to cast a Cultivate and realize that you don't have any other basics left in the deck to fetch. And not getting that landfall trigger can sometimes be the difference between loss and victory. Therefore, we have to be really, really choosy with the non-basics that we put into the deck, and unfortunately, some of them just won't make the cut. So what are some non-basics that I think are better? Well, Kessig Wolfrun is a win condition full stop. There's a reason Torment of Hailfire appears in the original average deck. We're not just winning with landfall triggers, we also will just end up with a bunch of mana, and Kessig can turn that mana into victory by pumping up any one of our creatures. The other one is one I recommended for Muldrotha decks too, Glacial Chasm. We can't be hurt as long as it's in play, so it lets us bide our time and build up our landfall payoffs. Importantly, it does not prevent damage to Windgrace, or prevent him from being attacked, so keep that in mind when you play it. But the defense it offers to us as a player just can't be overstated, especially when you can get it back at will to reset the upkeep cost whenever you like. I really want to suggest Urborg here, but it's not exactly budget friendly. I'll simply mention that it's not only useful when in conjunction with Cabal Coffers. Dread Presence is another amazing win condition if you have an Urborg, and getting these two out at the same time is just not hard when you've got a deck that searches for lands this easily. I won't make these an official inclusion here because Urborg is spendy, but if you've got an Urborg, make room for Dread Presence. Dread Presence has me thinking about some of the other important cards that I really want to add, but before I get to them, we have to make some room in the deck. And there are some stankers here that draw my eye. Seer's Sundial, for example. It's very, very slow. I'm just really not here for this one. And the brand new Surly Badgersaur has been added to lists online too, presumably to synergize with Windgrace's discard ability. But it really feels to me like it just gets in the way of the landfall stuff that we'd rather be doing. And finally, Nesting Dragon is the least exciting of our landfall payoffs. So what are we adding? Well, first of all, Evolution Sage does not appear in this average deck list, and that is criminal. This is like Windgrace's signature card. It is insanely good. Seriously, Evolution Sage only shows up in like 37% of Lord Windgrace lists so far. If this video inspires you to make just one single change to your Windgrace list, let it be this one. The final recommendation may feel a little out of left field, but I have a personal affinity for the card Seasons Past, which can get us back one card from the yard of each mana cost. At first, this feels weird to suggest. This can't get back all of our lands from the graveyard, only one. So why am I mentioning this in the point number 3 lands section? Why even bother with it? Well, we're not using this to get back our lands. What we're using this for is to get back the other cards that get back our lands. If we crack all of our lands with a Zurin Orb or Escape Shift and then Splendid Wreck them all back into play, our Rampaging Baloths are going to go so crazy that the rest of the table will definitely take notice. Their response will likely be to kill everything that we have in play. If we've already searched out a bunch of lands from our deck, this isn't the kind of thing we can replicate again very easily. The point of Seasons Past is to help us reclaim those spells, buying back our graveyard-focused interactions so we can repeatedly play a landfall threat and back them up with spells that make them immediately problematic. It's a bit of a pet card for me, but when you get back even 4 cards from this thing, it just feels so good. And 4 cards is a low estimate. Seasons Past launches you back into the game even if your plan A was completely scuppered, and that's a great feeling. Alright, back to the lands themselves. My eye is drawn to the card Field of the Dead, a fantastic incidental win condition if we assemble tons of lands. All we need are a bunch of lands with different names. Our non-basic lands obviously cover that, but our basic lands kinda get in the way since basics always have the same name as each other. Or do they? Yeah, we're adding snowlands. Aesthetically bothersome for our basics to not match each other? Maybe, but is it worth it when your forest and your snow forest count for 2 different names to help you churn out zombies? Absolutely. That leaves us with the final following deck list. As always, the link to the list can be found in the description below, with the cuts in the maybe board. So let me know what you think of these cuts and swaps in the comments below, and I would also really love to hear from you all about how you navigate the tricky deck building path of building landfall on a budget, and which cards you would invest into first when building this strategy for the first time. Thanks so much for watching.